on the science of reading, establishing targeted instruction. My name is Mike Savage, and I'm with Instructional Concepts, and I'm here to go over this webinar with you today. We're very happy you have decided to join us today. I know a good number of you are viewing this on recording, so if you are interested in receiving your CEUs for this webinar today, just feel free to email me when you are done. You can email me at the instructionalconcepts@gmail.com. Instructionalconcepts@gmail.com. I could put that, I'm not sure if you can see the chat on recording, but I'll review that at the very end of our session today, but instructionalconcepts@gmail.com. But anyway, I'd like to get into this with you a little bit today. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so who are we? Well, and who am I? Well, I'm Mike Savage, and I am the founder of Instructional Concepts. I am a current classroom teacher. I teach fifth grade at Excelsior Elementary School in Minnetonka, Minnesota. Excelsior, Minnesota, Minnetonka School District, I should say. Been doing teaching for about 16 years, both as a first grade teacher and as a fifth grade teacher. And in between those times as teachers, I spent about 9 years as a school principal. Learned a lot in that time, and thought that the best fit for me, though, is back in the classroom. That's where I'm at my very, very best. So, but I'm very blessed to have had that opportunity to be a principal for as long as I did, about 9 years there. But I'm coming to you today not from either of those hats, but more from Instructional Concepts here. And what we do is we offer these free webinars over the summer. We'll be doing them during the school year as well. And we offer graduate level classes as well. So the webinars are 100% free. But our graduate level courses are at cost. Right now, we're running a fall special, back to school special. All of our graduate level courses are just $300. We believe that that's the lowest price you will find out there for 3 semester credits. If you're interested in advancing your degree or getting lane changes, we would love to work with you on that. So we offer courses. You can check out our offerings at www.instructionalconcepts.net. And all of our courses are affiliated and accredited with Colorado State University Pueblo. So we're right now 100% approved. In other words, what I mean by that is any teacher that has selected us as Instructional Concepts to take courses with, their school districts have approved every one of the courses that we offer. So it's usually a pretty safe bet. But I always encourage that if you are going to take a course through us, make sure you get your district approval first. But that's been 100% for us. So we're not concerned about it, but just don't want to have any surprises for you. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll get into the content. But that's who I'm coming to you from today. Again, I'm Mike Savage, and I am the founder of Instructional Concepts. So in all of our sessions that we've offered this summer, I believe this is the 5th one, we always launch the seminar off with this conversation about grounding the work in high expectations. And I won't take a lot of time on this. Later in the fall, I will have a special session just on high expectations. And in fact, it's really not a conversation about high expectations, but rather I like to flip the conversation and talk about when in our educational time and our careers do we accidentally, and the key word being accidentally, lower expectations for students. And one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, do we often ever admit that? Oh, do we have low expectations for students? I don't think anyone would ever blatantly admit that they have low expectations for students on purpose. But what I have found over time is that a lot of teachers are very open and candid about being having their expectations lower for students accidentally. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll be brief, but sometimes the best of us, the best educators out there, are the ones that have a great heart and sympathy for kids. And sometimes that heart can get in the way. If a student comes to our classroom with a background of trauma, maybe it's homelessness, maybe it's divorce in the family, maybe there's drug abuse in the family, whatever it might be, do we sometimes let our expectation fall for that student because we have a heart for that student? And all of a sudden now we're simply satisfied for said student if they are just showing up to class on time, if they are not becoming a behavior issue, if they are turning in homework. Baseline level expectations can sometimes become celebrations for students who come to us with unique backgrounds, such as traumatic situations. And I like to share a message that that's probably a big disservice for some of our students, and we want to keep our expectations high. So I won't get into this at great length today, but later in the fall I will be doing a session on high expectations, specifically low expectations, and how we can avoid doing that. And what I find is that we can never really avoid having low expectations for students, but maybe we can minimize it for our students. So stay tuned for that. But I always like to start our sessions off with some conversations about high expectations, just to ground. And I have begun every webinar this summer with this same slide. And I always like to say, in this situation, if you look at this rope, it's very tangled. It can be very confusing to unravel, but all the parts are important. And so you go around the rope and you see things like sight recognition, phonological awareness, decoding, vocabulary, background knowledge, language structures, inferencing, and these skills are woven together. Language comprehension and word recognition are absolutely key, but all of these components in the reading row play a critical role in a student being able to comprehend at their particular grade level. And what we find is that the most proficient readers are the ones that look at that rope, or figuratively look at that rope, and are doing all those things kind of at the same time. It's how we operate as adults. We're doing all these things at the same time. Okay, so then the science of reading is saying, now do that. Teach that to your students, and that can be very challenging. At least for me it is. Maybe for some of you it's not, but it's very challenging and daunting for me to look at that and be like, okay, I'm going to try to do that for my fifth graders this year. How do I do that? So I do what a lot of people do, is I just need a simpler version of how to do this. And so what I have found, and this is what I want to talk to you guys about today, is that when we look at that reading rope, maybe instead of looking at let's believe in the reading rope. Let's believe in the science of reading. Let's believe that that's a good thing, but let's operate from the 5 pillars of reading. And I think this is another way of saying what the reading rope is saying. The 5 pillars of literacy, this, for some of us, and maybe for many of you, this is not new news. The 5 components of literacy, or the 5 pillars of literacy, come to us from the early 2000s, maybe even before that. But back in the early 2000s, under the No Child Left Behind Act, which some people were really excited about, and a lot of people weren't. And I remember those days quite vividly. But one of the good things that did come out of No Child Left Behind was this, specifically the National Reading Panel. And the National Reading Panel set out to do meta research on the best of the best reading instructors in the nation, and just made many observations and talked to many, many great teachers and asked them, what is it that you're doing that's making the biggest difference on kids? And to oversimplify a very complex study, the National Reading Panel basically landed on these 5 components of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And what the National Reading Panel set out to say in the early 2000s was that if reading teachers can commit to these 5 pillars of literacy, kids have a more than a fighting chance to become proficient readers. And back then we said like all students were going to be proficient readers by the end of third grade. Well, we've modified that over the years, but what is timeless, what appears that it's going to be timeless research are these 5 pillars of literacy. So one of the things I always like to point out with these 5 components of literacy is that they're not necessarily groundbreaking ideas, but they are the 5 things that we as educators should be committing to when we're teaching kids how to read. It starts with phonemic awareness, the idea of can young students hear the individual sounds that letters and words make. Phonics is now taking that sound that students are hearing in words and letters and applying a symbol to those sounds, such as a letter or a digraph or a vowel sound or something like that. But it's the writing or the understanding that the sound is represented with something. That's phonics as opposed to phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the hearing. Phonics is the seeing and maybe even the writing. Then once those are established, we move on to fluency, prosody, expression, reading rates, and then on to vocabulary, using a higher level words. Isabel Beck in her book, Bringing Words to Life, talks about tier 1 and tier 2 words, even tier 3 words. Tier 1 jumped, tier 2 leapt. Really simple example, but how do you incorporate more tier 2 words into a student's day? And of course, all of these first 4 components lead to comprehension. How do students comprehend what they are reading? So we look to that as well. So comprehension is just that, is the culmination of phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, and vocabulary, manifesting comprehension. And then it still means we can teach explicit comprehension strategies, yes, and the buildup of the other 4 pillars leads to this. So when we talk about targeted instruction, one of the things that we want to keep our eyes on are these 5 pillars of literacy. I personally can remember these 5 components, where this Scarborough's reading rope is a little overwhelming for me. But the 5 pillars of literacy is something that I can work with. So I know we're not going to talk about core instruction today, and if you are interested in our webinar on core instruction, I have that archived and I'm happy to send it out. I'll even offer CEUs for anyone who does go ahead and view it. But today we're talking about targeted instruction, and this is a continuation from our webinar on core instruction. But to review and be very brief with core instruction, if you are interested in going back and hearing the webinar on core instruction, just shoot me an email, instructionalconcepts@gmail.com. Go ahead and send me that email and I'll be happy to send you the core instruction webinar. But it's the idea that all students are receiving some sort of foundational reading skill instruction. It's very explicit. It's very systematic. You're focusing on those 5 pillars and you're delivering it to all students regardless of their abilities. It's not what the picture shows. The picture shows a small group instruction there, but it's large group instruction. It's a teacher teaching in front of a large group of students in what we don't like to say, in a kind of a one-size-fits-all manner that belongs in core instruction. You can view the core instruction webinar if you want to go deeper in that. Targeted instruction is what we're going to talk about today. This is where we're finding students who might need a little additional support. Maybe you want to supplement what was taught in core instruction in targeted instruction. You might be focusing on specific reading needs or challenges that students have. And they're usually delivered in small group, and sometimes people even deliver targeted instruction in a one-on-one basis, but most commonly it's going to be done in that small group setting. So we talked about core instruction last time. A couple of things we mentioned is that you should be following your district's language, arts, scope, and sequence. Your expertise matters. If you have a better way of teaching something in that in your scope and sequence or your teacher manual, and do it the way you know that works better because you are the experts here. But if when you don't have that really rich way of delivering that instruction, by all means, use what they offer you in the teacher manual, but commit to the scope and sequence, commit to the order. We talk about that in the core instruction webinar quite a bit. And then at the end, and this is where we kind of pick up today for targeted instruction, but at the end of core instruction, you are introducing in the large group something that the students can do independently during the targeted instruction time. And that's what we're going to take today and talk about. How do we take that targeted instruction, or excuse me, that skill that was taught during core instruction, and how do we promote that and take it deeper during targeted instruction? And so there's a phrase we're going to be using as we go through this process, as we prepare to release students from that core large group time into the small groups or the independent practice, and we'll talk all about that. But the phrase we're going to use a lot is called keep it simple and keep it connected. Keep it simple, keep it connected. And it's just the idea that try not to overthink this process and try to keep it connected to what was taught during core instruction. The stuff that you're doing in targeted instruction time should be connected to what you taught in core instruction. If they're not connected clearly, even for the student, if they're not connected, I would argue it's actually not the best use of targeted instruction time. Targeted instruction is going to be best when it is tightly aligned to the core instruction. So, and then ultimately, when you're teaching core instruction, the example that we used in the core instruction webinar was sequencing. If you're teaching the students how to sequence something, maybe on a flow map, that's what we used in our previous webinar, can now in targeted instruction, you just modeled it for them in core, can they do it on their own in targeted? And that's the goal at the end of core is, did you model something that the students can you model something that the students can practice on their own or complete on their own during targeted instruction? So let's get into what this targeted instruction might look like. So here's a kind of sensible way to look at it, a realistic way to look at it, just a way to do it in a way that's not overwhelming. But maybe think of targeted instruction as a 60-minute block of time. We recommended 20 to 30 minutes of core instruction in that webinar. And now we're tacking on an additional 60 minutes here at targeted time. Ideally, the core and the targeted time are uninterrupted. It's not impossible if they are interrupted. What I mean is, let's not have other subjects taught in between core instruction and target instruction. Let's try to avoid specialist or prep or lunch or recess or things like that. Let's try to keep these 90 minutes protected. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the 60 minutes of those 90 in targeted instruction. So small group time should be about 15 to 20 minutes per small group. So you're meeting, so two things are happening in core instruction. You are meeting with students in small groups. And in order to be able to do that most effectively as a teacher, you need, especially if you don't have any other paras or other adult support in the room, you need the other students to be doing something on their own, hopefully meaningful, but minimally on their own, so that you can be uninterrupted and focused on that small group instruction. When I was first doing small group instruction, I had a really difficult time with this. And I found that I was teaching in small group at a kidney table, and seriously, almost half the time having to stop the instruction. Hey, it would sound something like this. Hey guys, I'm so sorry, but Joey, can you sit down over there? We're trying to have small group over here. Or yes, you can go to the, sure. Or, yeah, can you make sure you sit down? I'll get your question in a little bit. You know, it's a lot of that when you're trying to have this small group instruction time. Can't have that, really, to be really honest. You can't, and that sometimes can be really daunting. But in an ideal world, and I know I'm kind of talking in ideal terms right now, but the independent students should be doing their independent stuff so that you can be doing your small group instruction. Not easy, but possible. I will say possible. And that's where we go back to our conversation about low expectations. Do we really believe that this is possible, that a teacher can teach in small group, uninterrupted by 20 to 25 other students in the classroom? It might be like, nope, that is impossible. And I get it. But I actually, in all seriousness, I would say it is possible, and more likely than we might think. And it really comes down to that end of the core instruction time. Did you give them something to do that they can do on their own? And even if it seems so simple, even if it seems so mundane or so easy, you got to go with it, because this targeted instruction time, this individual small group time, is so important. So what are you doing during targeted instruction? Hopefully not sitting at a kidney table telling other kids what to do independently, but what should you be doing? You should be at a kidney table or a small group table, delivering uninterrupted small group instruction for about 15 to 20 minutes each day per group. Independent practice. This is the hardest part of targeted instruction. I think maybe some of you are like, no, that's actually pretty easy. But for me, this was always the hardest part. But all other students are working on something that was taught or modeled during core instruction, along with possibly a daily menu of options that the teacher would like to see students work on. So for me, like in fifth grade, again, I'm not saying you have to do it my way or anything like that, but if I'm teaching sequencing and I just modeled for them how to fill out a flow map, so what happened first in a story, what happened next in a story, what happened at the end of the story. Maybe I'm saying at the end of core instruction, okay, we're going to move into targeted time now. So if you're at your seat, you're working on your flow map. And then once you're done with your flow map, here are the list of options I would like you to do. And in my classroom, it's going to be independent level reading time. Get out your novel and read from your book. 2, IXL. We have a school-wide subscription to IXL where students have these skill plans, and maybe I should do a webinar on IXL one of these times and kind of talk about how we use IXL on my fifth grade team at my school. Anyway, but that's a big go-to that keeps them quiet, to be honest. That keeps them pretty quiet. So IXL time. Some of our students are on Lexia. If you haven't heard about Lexia, it's a online program to help them with their phonics and their phonemic awareness, maybe even their vocabulary through Greek and Latin roots. Other reading activities, ideally, the independent time is language arts based. I'm going to be honest with you, as a fifth grade teacher, I have sort of even slipped into the, hey, Mr. Savage, would it be okay if I finish my math homework during targeted independent time? I'm going to be honest, I've said yes to that sometimes because I'm clear on what I need. I need the uninterrupted time during the instructional small group time. Is it connected like we're talking about? Am I maybe I'm keeping it simple. I'm coming up with an easy thing the kid can do. They want to do it. They want to get their math homework done. Am I keeping it connected? Probably not. But we're not looking for perfection here. We're not looking for an absolute masterpiece. So if that's what it takes to get me through an effective use of targeted time as a whole, I might say yes to that, knowing that I probably shouldn't. Does that even make sense? But that's what I'm kind of saying here, is that you got to bend it to make it work for you. You got to bend it. But what are those other independent activities? The first grade version of this, there were a lot of coloring sheets, a lot of drawing, a lot of handwriting practice. I would do practicing decodable readers. I use those whisper phones a lot in first grade. Lots of things like that. This is where worksheets can work to your advantage, to be honest with you. If you have a good worksheet that can be done independently, and if it's connected to the core instruction time, you got to go with it. And as you develop your targeted instruction time, you can have a lot more rich ideas, but those are a couple of options there. But I would maybe recommend keep that menu of options consistent, so the kids know what they're going to expect each and every day. They're going to be doing this every day of the year, so you want the students to know what's happening. So hopefully that makes sense. But two main things are going on. You as the teacher, you're teaching your small group. And then the other part of it is students are doing their thing. They're working independently. Sometimes if a para does come into the room during my targeted time, I'm not necessarily having that para pull a small group. Sometimes I'll do that, but more often it's just monitor and just kind of walk around the room and make sure students are working on something during targeted time. Make sure they're working on something. And a para usually receives that pretty well, and then can find really good ways to be very effective during that time. And of course, if you're anything like me, it's sometimes I have to pull the paraprofessional aside and say, hey, just one other thing, if you don't mind. As you're walking around the classroom with the students and checking in, if you just keep it to a whisper, because sometimes I love the parents, I really do. They do amazing work, but sometimes their voices can be louder than the students, and so we want to try to avoid that. But paraprofessionals can definitely be a huge asset during core or during targeted instruction time, for sure. For sure. If there's any paras listening right now, no, I love you. I do. You guys are amazing. You guys hear stuff about students even before we as classroom teachers hear about them, because you're with them in small group settings so much. So anyway, we love you. Totally. Okay, anyway, back to this targeted instruction, small group, keep it simple, keep it connected. Okay, don't overthink these small group lessons. Really don't. What can you do there? Well, let's talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about the structure first. How do you group these kids? How do you do this? Okay, so ideally you're grouping them by some sort of data. Later in the fall, I'm going to do a webinar. I think I got this one scheduled for October. I'm going to do a webinar on assessment, straight up assessment in the science of reading. How can you use your assessment data to really tailor your targeted instruction time? That's a whole webinar worth there, to be honest. Gonna set that up. More subjectively. You want to be doing this a little more scientifically. So to check that box, do it with data. Do it with data. Use some data that you have to do this. And at the end of this webinar, I actually have a quick and dirty way, if you are void of data, that you can group some students, and I'll get to that in just a moment here. But anyway, what are you looking at? Your higher needs kids, maybe 3 to 5 in those small groups, and maybe 3 to 4. You just want to keep those, you want to get that ratio down as much as possible with your higher needs group. This is not rocket science here. And your lower needs students, maybe those groups could be as big as 7, 5 to 7 kids. The idea, those aren't scientific numbers. It's just this idea that the higher need kids should be in smaller small groups, and the kids with the lesser need should be in small groups, but maybe those groups can be a little larger. That's all I'm trying to say there. But then ultimately, what are you teaching here? Okay, so keep it simple, keep it connected, deeper instruction on what was taught during core instruction. That's one thing that you could teach in core. Hey, we talked about sequencing in core today. Now today in small group, guys, we're going to take that sequencing and we're going to take it deeper. And you deliver more instruction on how to sequence events in a story. Or whatever you taught in core instruction, compare and contrast, genres of fiction. You take that concept and you take it deeper in targeted instruction. Talk about what it is, maybe do a book read. You're reading out of a book together that helps them focus on that particular skill, whatever it might be. Or you are providing instruction on a learning gap, and not just a made up learning gap, but something properly diagnosed with data that will tell you if it's a phonemic awareness issue, a phonics issue, a comprehension issue, a vocabulary issue, a fluency issue. And later in that quick and dirty method, I can show you a way that you can get that information really quickly if you don't have a proper assessment to do that, or you don't necessarily know. You might have the assessment, but you don't know how to read the data. I totally get that too. I got a quick and dirty way to do that. But in that small instruction time, small group instruction time, maybe it's not necessarily directed exactly to what was taught during core. For example, last year I had a lot of students that just had big phonics issues in 5th grade, big phonics issues, couldn't spell. They really just couldn't spell. And it really affected their reading. And in some of the small group time would provide time for me to just do some phonics work with a small group of students in a 5th grade classroom during that target instruction time. So maybe we were talking about sequencing, but then during target instruction, I'm working with them on breaking words down, larger 5th grade words, not doing 1st grade words with them, but 5th grade words, and having them break them down syllable by syllable, working with them on morphology, working with them on identification of Greek and Latin roots, but really and that's a little more, that's vocabulary really. But anyway, but you kind of get the idea of maybe that group needs some work on phonics. Maybe that group needs work on fluency. Maybe that group needs work on vocabulary. Then you tailor your lesson around that. Ideally, during targeted instruction, you're doing at least one of those 5 pillars of literacy. And in the core instruction webinar, we talked about this idea of you don't have to knock out all 5 pillars of literacy every single day of the year. A good rule of thumb is maybe over the course of the week, are students being exposed to all 5 of those components, kind of a blend. So then you're not having to necessarily get every single pillar in every single day. That's absurd. That's impossible. I think maybe you can do it. I can't. But maybe over the course of the week, that I could do. I can maybe get them all in over the course of a week, maybe 2 weeks, whatever it is. But it's the idea. It doesn't have to be every single day. All 5 pillars have to be addressed. And some kids are going to be heavy on the phonics. Like I'd be so heavy, but the targeted time is the time to drill down deep on a phonics issue if kids need it, or if a bunch of kids have fluency issues. Targeted instruction is the time to really zero in on those fluency issues. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, targeted instruction, getting them hitting the target. In core instruction, you're not really trying to hit the target. You're trying to throw a whole bunch of information out there. One size fits all. Some of you got it. I know some of you didn't, but we're going to try to clean that up a little bit now in targeted instruction time. Okay. So I kind of alluded to this already. We've talked about this quite a bit in this webinar, but in the core instruction webinar, we talked about sequencing. We talked about, we walked through a process that students fill out a flow map. In the core instruction lesson that I use as an example, students had modeled for them how to fill out a flow map, like a graphic organizer from a educational company called Thinking Maps. That's a proper noun. They came up with these graphic organizers that are a little more robust than a simple worksheet. Anyway, we can talk about that at some point too, but they have something called flow maps. And so in core instruction, I modeled I talked about how you can model how to fill out a flow map. Okay. And so then in targeted instruction, okay, students are finding the time now to work on their own flow map. I modeled it in core, and now I want you to do it during targeted instruction. Okay. So they're doing what you modeled from core instruction. I feel like we've talked about flow map. We're going to fill it out together over here during small group time. You have those options. And so then all of a sudden, that's a really nice targeted instruction lesson because you're keeping it connected. Frankly, you're keeping it simple too, because you're basically reteaching what you just taught in core instruction. And I would add that it is absolutely okay to use targeted instruction time to simply reteach what you taught in core. And if this webinar is overwhelming, then maybe you just hold on to that what do I teach during targeted instruction? Well, I'm just going to reteach 3 different times, I mean, 3 groups every day. I'm just going to reteach what I taught in core to each of those 3 groups. Hey, that works too. And that's pretty simple. And then even if you try to teach it the exact same way, I bet what would happen, and I know it happens because I've done it before, is it comes out in a different way. You differentiate just because you know what you're doing. You differentiate it based on the students that you're working on. And all of a sudden, your students just got a really rich, differentiated lesson of what was taught in core. So if all else fails, just reteach what you taught during core instruction for the kids, even with your highest students, even with your lowest students. Just reteach it. It's a great way to do targeted instruction. I feel like I kind of talked about this already too, but the 5 pillars of reading instruction should be happening during core instruction as well. During that small group time, we should have that focus on this. What we tend to find, these are just trends. This is not absolute. This is not truth, but just generally speaking, if you look at a lot of data on students, your higher need students, whether you're in the younger grades, the primary grades, or the middle elementary, or even upper elementary, high need students generally need more emphasis on phonemic awareness and phonics. Okay, take that as a guidance on what you're doing with which particular kids during targeted instruction time. It would not be surprising if you had a group of lower achieving reading students at the targeted instruction small group table, and someone were to drop in and watch that lesson. It would not be a surprise to see them working on something phonics based or something phonemic awareness based, even in the 5th, 6th grade levels. Not a surprise at all. So that's a generality, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. Your average students, maybe their phonemic awareness and their phonics is okay. Maybe those average students are spending time working on fluency and vocabulary. Again, just generally the kids on track, they're doing decent. I'm not overly concerned. They're not necessarily high flyers. They're getting by. Maybe their targeted instruction time is focused on fluency and vocabulary. And then your low need students, these are your high flyers, maybe some of your gifted and talented students, or the students that are right on the cusp of that. Maybe you're getting in some deeper level comprehension with them. How does this apply in your personal life? What are other possible scenarios that happen in the real world that happen in this story here that we talked about today? Getting into those comprehension level questions directly with the highest kids. And then consider structuring your small group time based on student need. In other words, you're not necessarily, I know some people do this. I'm going to meet with every student the exact same amount of time for the entire year. Totally fine. Totally fine. Just hold on to the principles of targeted instruction. I might offer you could do a little better on differentiation by just making your job a little bit easier. Instead of trying to get every kid in every other day or even every day, maybe it's more about your high needs kids need you daily. They need that small group daily. Your average kids might only need you, and I mean average. I'm talking data, by the way. I'm not. These are not general terms. I'm probably making them sound general, but the data says they're high needs. The data says they're average. The data says they're low needs. I'm coming at it through the lens of data. So if the data says they're high needs, I'm trying to meet with them daily. If they're average students, the data is suggesting, maybe I'm meeting with them 2 to 3 times per week. Maybe every other day, that sort of thing. And then if it's a low need student, you don't want to, I've learned this, you don't want to leave those kids out of small group instruction because they'll tell you about it. They'll get on your case. Hey, why don't we ever get to come over there? some of that language percolates. And so you got to meet, and they need it too, but maybe you're meeting with them less frequently. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, oh man, if you do that, well, then won't the other students know who the high kids are, who the average kids are, who the low kids are? Are they going to see that? And is that equity? Is that fair? No, yeah, they might, but it's also, I think that can be done in a very loving, caring, inclusive way too. I just think it can be. A lot over the year, we have a lot of conversations in my classroom about we all need different things. our brains are all wired differently. IXL actually helps with this a lot. IXL has these skill plans, if you're familiar with them. And the skill play, kids, I'll be real quick about this, but kids take this diagnostic test. And then at the end of this diagnostic test in IXL, it gives them a skill plan. And every single student's skill plan, of course, is different because every kid's going to have certain strengths, weaknesses, what have you. And then on their skill plan, it tells them literally what grade level they're at in individual skills. And what's so interesting is when I do this at the beginning of the year, is what's so interesting is that when kids see this, they quickly realize, like, oh my gosh, I've always been a really smart student. And a kid might say, but I didn't know I had something. They get embarrassed by this, but I didn't know my I'm making stuff up right now, but my data analysis around fractions is actually at a second grade level. And they get a little embarrassed, they get a little nervous. And then we just encourage us to have open dialogue about that. And I reveal to them, without calling out individual kids, that every single skill plan is like that. Some of you might be surprised that you're at a higher grade level in something. And some of you might be like, well, I had no idea I'm at a first grade level in this. I'll even say to them, as a 51-year-old teacher, there are some things that I am really good at, and there are some things I'm frankly terrible at. And so we all come to the table with different skill sets. There isn't a single one of us in this classroom that is fifth grade level in every single thing we do. It's not humanly possible. I even say to the students, the only reason we group you guys by grades is because it's the most efficient way to do it. It's probably not the most effective way to do it, but it's the most efficient way to kind of keep you moving through the system. And so we have deep conversations about that. And so all of a sudden, the classroom culture is not what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a bad thing to have different needs, I guess is all I'm trying to say. And all of a sudden, if a kid's meeting targeted instruction daily and other kids are meeting once a week, well, hopefully we've done a good job having these conversations about all of our brains being different and we all need different things, and that it becomes it's just not a thing. It's just not even a thing. And you go from there. But I think that's a big part of target instruction, is just setting up that the why do we do it, that inclusive side of things. I think it's all very important. And I'm going back to the beginning, making sure it's grounded in high expectations, or making sure you're grounding it in times where you're not accidentally lowering expectations for students. So I talked about this quick and dirty way. We're getting near the end here. This quick and dirty way of what to do during targeted instruction. I guess I kind of already shared one, just reteach. You could certainly just reteach what was in core. But maybe if you want to take that kind of next level, what are your data points? You look at your NWEA strands, you look at your summative data, you meet in PLCs. We're going to meet with this group on this. We're going to meet with this one. Okay, sure, great. Fantastic. You can do that. And that's probably encouraged. That's probably what the best of them are doing. Not all of us are there. So what are some other ways we can do? I'm being facetious, but I have this really extremely scientific approach that will blow your mind. I'm just joking. It's actually quite simple. Let me share this with you. Here it comes. And I'm not even trying to joke here. This does work, but if you just have your students just do a quick writing sample, even if and more authentic the better. Make sure you don't want to over pump them up. Hey, this is a graded writing assignment, so do your very best. You almost don't want that. You just want something that's every day. It's very authentic. Give them a quick writing prompt. Quick write, 5 minutes on the clock, 3 minutes on the clock, whatever you have time for. Write about what you're most excited about doing tonight. Whatever the prompt would be. We can probably brainstorm lots of better prompts than that. Have them write 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. Collect them. Move on with your day. When you have some time, take a look at that and basically make 2 piles. I'm sorry, here, 1 second. Basically make 2 piles of the writing. Look for words that are at your grade level that generally should be spelled appropriately. And if a student is making a lot of spelling mistakes on those grade level words, put them in one pile. if to look at the writing, and don't get into content, don't get into punctuation, don't get into capitalization, just look for spelling. Just look for spelling. If you're seeing a lot of spelling errors, put them in one pile. If you're not seeing a lot of spelling errors, put them in another pile. Really simple. 2 piles, lots of spelling errors, very few spelling errors, and save the questions of, well, what if it's in the middle? Don't just flip a coin. Flip a coin. It doesn't really matter. It matters that you have 2 piles. Okay. So, and then basically what we're doing here is that if you see a lot of frequent spelling mistakes at grade level words, you know, if they're misspelling like a high school word or a proper noun, don't count that against them. But if it's like for me, a 5th grade word and those words are being misspelled, or even words that they should have learned maybe back in 1st or 2nd grade, I'm putting that in pile 1. If I'm not seeing a lot of errors, or they're only making spelling errors on really, really advanced words, I'm putting that in pile 2. Targeted instruction now, pile 1, kids, I'm working on phonemic awareness and phonics. Simple as that. Simple as that. And if I'm not seeing a lot of spelling errors, I'm working on fluency, I'm working on vocabulary, I'm working on comprehension. And maybe I cycle through these. Maybe one day's fluency, next day's comprehension, next day's vocabulary, whatever. Mixing in the reteaching as well. It's simple. It's not the best, but it's better than nothing. You know, it's better than nothing. So you can leave here thinking that you got at least 2 options during targeted instruction. You could simply reteach what was taught during core, or you can use this very, very scientific approach around student analysis. Hey, you could tell your principal, you know, what you could say is like, hey, I got this really great way of analyzing student work. I actually look at it quite scientifically, and I take frequent spelling errors of students and I examine that, and I actually can develop a way to properly place these students during targeted instruction based on the 5 components of literacy. I mean, you could talk like that, but really it's quite a simple approach. My staffs, that when I was a principal, I would offer this to them, and a lot of teachers used it, to be honest with you. A lot of teachers used this when we did this in my buildings. So real quick as we wrap up here, the checklist. Do you have a good targeted instruction time setup? Well, let's run through these 5 questions really quick. Number 1, did you model something that the students can do during core? Did that happen? Hopefully, yes. If you didn't, okay, maybe tomorrow. try to get that a little better tomorrow. But model something that all students can work on during core instruction, and then release them to that during targeted time. Make sure you establish a small group instruction schedule. You know, we talked about that earlier. Who's meeting with you daily? Who's meeting every other day? Who's meeting weekly? How are you making these instructional decisions? What data points are you going to use? Are you going to use data points? Okay, this is the science of reading. We should be. And we'll do a full webinar on that later. But I even gave you ways today to answer question number 3. If you don't have data, reteach or the scientific method. You can use those, but know what you're doing. You know, how are you making your instructional plans for small groups? 4, what components of literacy are you addressing in this particular targeted lesson? What are you looking to do? And will students be able to students be able to independently complete what you've modeled for them in core instruction? I'm going to contend if you can answer all 5 of those questions, you got a pretty rock solid targeted instruction time set up for your students. So that could be a little cheat sheet there to work on as you go on. We also conclude all of our webinars with this here. It's an instructional framework within a 90-minute time frame. Basically, a couple ideas here. On the left side, you see something called the 30-60 model. What we're trying to say here, what I'm trying to suggest here, is that maybe core instruction is 30 minutes, targeted instruction is 60 minutes. I remember what I said earlier, maybe uninterrupted, ideally, that's going to be the best. I'm over on the right side now. My 5th grade team and I, we've talked about this. You know, we thought, well, maybe sometimes the 30-60 model doesn't work. So maybe you do a 50-40 model, and, you know, maybe 1st grade teachers are like, forget about that. There's no way I can do a 50-minute core lesson. I can't even do a 30-minute core lesson. Okay, sure. But let's say just for the sake of like a big project or something, and you need to model something at greater length, maybe you do 50 minutes of core and then 40 minutes of targeted. And of course, if you're gonna cut down your targeted, well, what happens? Okay, you're gonna get a fewer small group opportunities in there. So just something to think about there. These aren't published recommendations. If you wanted to do a 25-65 model, you could do a 40-50 model. The idea here is have a designated core time, have a designated targeted time, and try to keep it as simple and connected as possible over the course of the year. More times than not, I'm over on the left side. Even when I taught first grade, I was on the 30-60 model. I continue that in fifth grade right now too, the 30-60 model. But yeah, if you need to go to 20-70, whatever you need to do, but that's however you want to bend that, it would be good there. So I'm very grateful. Like I said, when we're done today, just make sure you email me your name, and I can, and of course, with the correct spelling, with your last name too, so I can prepare a CEU certificate for you. The CEU certificate will be branded with Instructional Concepts and Colorado State University Pueblo. So it should be accepted by your school districts. I haven't had nobody tell me it hasn't been yet. But again, we are Instructional Concepts. We offer these free webinars. We would love to partner with you in your advanced learning as well. We offer graduate level courses. The one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of our session today is that our graduate level courses are not on video calls. They're all self-study. So basically, if you register for a course, I then send you everything you need to complete the course. The syllabus, the books, articles, whatever you need will be emailed to you. And then from the day you register, you have 1 full year to complete the course. Complete the course. I'm gonna be honest with you. Some people complete a course as quick as 2 weeks, and some people take the full year. They're just busy. It's self-paced, you know. And what I found is if you can lock yourself in a room for a long period of time uninterrupted, you can knock out our courses relatively quickly. Some people just like to go methodically, chapter by chapter. I'm gonna do 1 chapter a week for however many chapters there are on the book. Totally fine too. And I like to think that our courses are always geared to the practical teacher. So a lot of the assignments that you do are hopefully things that you're doing in your planning anyway. For example, in our courses, one of the assignments we always have teachers do is write a lesson plan for the course that you're studying, but literally just do your normal lesson plans and show us how it applies to the book that we're reading. Anyway, it's all laid out in the syllabus. So a lot of the work you would do for the courses are things that you're doing anyway in your classroom. So I could send you a free sample of a syllabus too if you are interested in that. Yeah, and then we're gonna have more of these webinars. Next one's gonna be next Tuesday. That's the 19th. If you're viewing this before the 19th, 2025, at 11:30, we're gonna do a repeat session. This was a very popular one, behavior management in the post-COVID classroom. You know, and then as it pertains to today, that kind of impacts our targeted instruction time as well. So I just want to thank you all for joining and reviewing the recording of this webinar. And when you are complete with the webinar, just feel free to email me, instructionalconcepts@gmail.com, instructionalconcepts@gmail.com. It's right there. It's not there, but Instructional Concepts is. Just email me that you're done, and I'll get that CEU certificate sent out to you as soon as possible. So again, thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.